Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Backstage Pass. My name is Dean Butch. I'm your host of the show. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to be sitting down with a gentleman that is not only the musical host of the Smooth Jazz Cruise, but he's performed on over 500 recordings. He's a Grammy Award-winning artist. He is recognized in the industry as one of the most phenomenal musicians, gentlemen as such. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce you to Mr. Marcus Miller. Hey.
Mr. Dane.
What's going on?
How did you get Alonzo Bowden to agree to Dance with the Stars?
Well, I didn't. I just kind of scheduled him. And actually, when he...
You know, that's what he does sometimes. He doesn't tell you, he doesn't call you. You arrive on the ship, and you open up the schedule, and Alonzo goes, oh, man, I'm Dancing with the Stars. You know what? That's going to be worth seeing.
Well, this afternoon while we were in the office, he tried to get out of it, and I said, I was recently on a phone call with Marcus Miller.
Don't put me in it, man. Please don't put me in it.
And I said, and you said to me, did you know, are you really going to have Alonzo Dancing with the Stars? And I was like, do you want me to? And he's like, yeah, so there we go. That's what's happening.
See, no matter how bad he is, I'm not going to say anything because then I get really killed during his routine when he does his comedy routine. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to laugh silently.
Yeah, the comedy routine will be Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah.
Listen, you've got a new album coming out.
Just finished it, just right before the holidays. It's going to come out in March. I work for UNESCO. You familiar with UNESCO? It's like the goodwill arm of the UN. Right?
2 or 3 years ago, you got recognized as an artist for...
Artist for Peace.
Artist for Peace.
But I'm also like the spokesperson for a project called the Slave Roots Project, which just basically raises awareness for young people of like the story of slavery. But anyway, I got into it musically. I was like, you know what I want to do, man? I want to follow the slave roots musically. So I collaborated with some musicians from West Africa, some musicians from South America, from the Caribbean, and from the Delta, right? Just kind of follow the thing. Not anything like, it doesn't sound like historic music. It's contemporary music. But I just involved all these guys, you know. My French came in handy with the West Africans, you know what I mean?
Did you know these musicians before, or did your management and...
I met one guy. His name was Alun. I was in Poland in a jazz festival, and this African guy introduces himself. He says, Marcus, my name is Alun, but in Senegal, they know me as Marcus. I am the Marcus of Africa. I'm serious. That's what he said. And he handed me his business card, and it said, Marcus. He said, if you're in Senegal and you say Alun, they won't know who you're talking about. But if you say Marcus, they go, oh, yeah, I know Marcus. So anyway, and he thought, he said he listened to me growing up as a kid. He thought I was a white guy, you know what I mean? And he said, like I figured all Americans are white people, you know what I mean? So, but anyway, he was a really nice guy. And I said, look, I want to do this collaboration. And he said, well, I know all the African musicians that you should collaborate with. So he put it together for me. It was really, really nice experience. So I'm really excited for everybody to hear it. You know.
And comes out in March?
Comes out in March on Blue Note Records. My first record on Blue Note. Thank you.
And what a great record label. You've been on a lot of albums, over 500 recordings. You've written for pretty much everybody. Right.
Oh, well, you know, a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what happened was I was a musician in New York in the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
And in New York, you know, everything's compact, you know. So actually in New York, all the recording studios are in the Times Square area. So it's only like 10 blocks. So I could play on a session for George Benson from 10 to 1, and 1:30 I could be playing for Aretha Franklin, you know, 5 minutes away. And so you could really get a lot of work in. So I was just running up and down Broadway, just playing on different people's records. It was a great experience, you know.
Were you nervous going into some of those recordings and meeting some of the idols and legends that, you know, you'd listen to yourself?
I tell you, the weirdest thing is when you're coming up as a young musician, you're always playing with other musicians who are emulating somebody else, right? So you play with a guitar player who thinks he's George Benson, you know, you play with a singer who thinks she's Aretha. So the weirdest thing is when you're in the studio and you got your headphones on, and you're playing and you hear this guitar lick, you go, oh, there's another dude trying to play like George Benson. And then you look up and go, wait, that is George Benson. You know? And I've actually said to people, like, I said, you sound just like Aretha Franklin. Aretha? And she's looking at me crazy, but it's a weird experience because, you know, you're a kid and, you know, everyone's trying to play like Herbie Hancock or everybody's trying to play like all the greats. So to actually play with them is a real mind-tripping experience.
Who did you want to play like?
I wanted to play like, first I wanted to play like Jermaine Jackson from the Jackson 5.
Really?
Right? But I realized that it wasn't really Jermaine playing on all those records. Motown was running a scam, you know? It was a guy named James Jamerson. And James Jamerson was the studio musician in Detroit for all the Motown records, and he was just an incredible bass player. I just thought Jermaine Jackson was the baddest 14-year-old bass player ever. And it turns out he is a good bass player, but it was James Jamerson who I was trying to beat. And then a guy named Larry Graham. You guys know Larry Graham? He was like one of the first guys to start slapping and plucking the bass. And then a guy named Stanley Clarke. He was my hero for a while, yeah. And then on the jazz side, you know, I love the guys who played with Miles Davis. So a guy named Paul Chambers and a guy named Ron Carter. They were really, really important for me.
Let me ask you, when you hear somebody emulate you and impersonate you, there must be a level of flattery, but is there a level of, don't do that?
You know, you feel different things at different times. My first reaction when I first heard somebody doing that was, wow, that guy must have listened to the same guys I listened to when he was growing up, you know? And then he'd come up to me after the show, no, I listened to you, you know what I mean? So that was a good way for it to happen because then you realize it's not you they're emulating because you're emulating somebody and it's coming through you. Right. So he's just emulating all the guys behind me. You know what I mean? So it's just a continuum. So it's a good way to think of it so your head doesn't get too big. You know what I mean? Start thinking it all comes from you. You know what I mean? That's not how it works. But and then some guys you get a little depressed because you can tell they think they're playing like you, but you say, is that what you think I sound like? You know what I mean? So that's depressing sometimes, you know? And then sometimes it's guys who are playing like you better than you. And that's depressing too. You know, like he's playing all my licks from like 5 years ago that I forgot how to play, you know what I mean? So, but it's all really a blessing, man, just to have a sound that anyone would want to emulate, you know?
And before we go to commercial break, is there someone that you can name that does play sort of like you, but in your opinion, better than you?
Yeah, he's right now I think he's 15 or 16 years old. His name is Brandon Rose, and Brandon comes from Detroit. You know, he grew up in the church playing bass. And you know, when we record a record in the studio, you know, for my solo, I'm improvising. I'm just making it up right there. So once it's done, I forgot it, you know?
Right.
But young Brandon, he's sitting there with headphones on, learning every lick. So we did a gig in Detroit, and I invited Brandon up to play with me, and he kicked my ass. because he played my solo from the record note for note. I'm trying to make up some other stuff, you know what I mean? And the people in the audience going, no, that's the way it goes. So that wasn't too cool. But I had a little talk with Brandon after that.
Well, we're going to be talking right after this break. Stick around. You're watching Backstage Pass with Marcus Miller. The Smooth Jazz Cruise, as known more commonly as the greatest party at sea, continues to be the most heralded cruise of its kind in the world. For the past 12 years and 18 sailings, no cruise has presented more talent, more music, or provided its guests with greater luxury and excitement. The Smooth Jazz Cruise 2016 will carry on that tradition with 2 sailings, January 10th through 17th, and again February 21st through 28th. Once again, the Smooth Jazz Cruise will present a superstar lineup featuring the top names in the genre. Join Marcus Miller, David Sanborn, Bernie James, Brian Culbertson, Candy Dolfer, Richard Elliott, Norman Brown, Peebo Bryson, Wycliffe Gordon, Shantae Moore, Grace Kelly, Eric Marienthal, Brian Simpson, comedian Alonzo Bowden, and party band DW3, together with 3 amazing bands and exciting additional performers and vocalists. The Smooth Jazz Cruise has always been the greatest party at sea, and for 2016, in the beautiful ports of call, will be breezin', as one of our most beloved special guests, George Benson, returns to perform all of his biggest hits and take the party to a whole new level. The Smooth Jazz Cruise will sail in Holland America America's MS Eurodam from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and will visit the exciting ports of call, including Half Moon Cay, Grand Cayman, Cozumel, and Key West. Save the date now, as each year the Smooth Jazz Cruise sells out, simply because it was the first and is the #1 greatest contemporary music charter cruise in the world.
This is the best cruise.
I'm on my 7th Smooth Jazz Cruise, and it's the greatest week of my entire year.
I showed up here with 60 friends of mine, and for 1 week, we had a ball. I've told all my friends who are back in Nigeria, they'll have to be very patient with me when I get back, because it'll take a long time for me to descend from heaven.
Log on to www.thesmoothjazzcruise.com. Welcome back to Backstage Pass. I'm sitting down with the incredible Marcus Miller. I want to touch base on a couple of things that, to be honest, are a little bit sensitive. And I want to start with the bus crash that happened a few years ago.
We
You're on your way to Monte Carlo, right?
Yeah, well, we just finished a gig in Monte Carlo at a jazz festival, and this is in November. And after the gig, as usual, we had to get on the bus at 3:30, 4 o'clock a.m. to drive, 17 hours to a gig we had in Holland. And so we got on the bus, and we all sleep on the bus. They have, bunks, one on top of the other, and I had a lounge in the back on the second floor. Anyway, I guess 3 or 4 hours into the trip, we're all asleep, and next thing you know, we hear a big crash, and it turns out that the bus driver had lost control of the bus, hit the side rail, and the whole bus flipped on its side, right? It was horrible. The bus driver unfortunately lost his life. It was very, very serious. The band, cracked ribs, bruised spleen, couple of, broken bones. Nothing really, really serious compared to the driver, but it was a very, very traumatic experience, especially when we got off the bus. Finally, they kind of got us off the bus, and you turned back and looked at the bus on its side.
Wow.
And you realize, man, we're in Switzerland with mountains everywhere and tunnels everywhere. I mean, what are the odds that we're on a straight road with no cliffs, nothing, that we were just, actually, as crazy as it sounds, fortunate enough to be right on that kind of a level piece of road, so that it wasn't much worse.
When that happened and you finally realized what happened and you're there, how long was it until emergency crews and things like that came?
Well, I'll tell you, we were in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So it seemed like 30 seconds before all of a sudden helicopters were coming out of everywhere, out of nowhere. And, there were those cameras, those remote control cameras that are just flying in the air.
Drones?
They're all over the place. And they got everybody. There was no hospital that was large enough to take our whole group. We had about 15 people on the bus. So these helicopters came and airlifted people to different hospitals in the area. Personally, I didn't feel anything because it was my band, right? And in my band, I've got these incredible young musicians, 21, 22, 24 years old, and all I could think of is, please don't let their career end, on my gig, So they're all sitting out in front of the bus after the accident, and I'm just going to each guy, just move your fingers for me, okay? Just move your fingers. How's your mouth? Let me see your mouth, I went to each guy because I wouldn't have been able to handle it, if something like that had happened. And, you think of all sorts of stuff, man, but, at the end of that day, it was a long day. We were in the hospital, got x-rayed. We had to go back to the bus and try to retrieve our stuff, and that was tough. And then we ended up in the hotel finally at night. I was able to contact my wife before the news got out, because the problem was that the way the news put it, man, it was like a famous bass player involved in fatal bus accident. Right. You know what I mean? So I was so glad I could get my wife before she read an article like that. You know what I mean? Because that would have been horrible. And the problem was that a lot of my friends didn't get a phone call from me. They had to read that article. Our oldest son, we have 4 kids. Our oldest boy read that, that headline. Right. He had a presence of mind to continue reading the article, which said that I was released from the hospital. The last sentence in article, but it was a long read. You know what I mean? So that was difficult, but the love, man, that we got, man, was just completely overwhelming. Larry Graham, my hero, I told you he's my hero. Yeah. He called me, you know, you okay? And Verdine White from Earth, Wind & Fire, Marcus, are we okay? I was like, I don't know how you doing, but I'm okay, you know. But it was truly a really like life-altering experience.
And a few years, I think, before that, you did a Legends tour with Eric Clapton and Sanborn and Joe Sample and Steve Gadd. And then we lost Sample just last year. Oh,
man. Joe Sample, you know, he was on the cruise about, was it 3 years ago?
3 years, I think.
He was on the cruise 3 years ago, and for those of you who were here, if you were here, you remember, you know what I'm about to say. Joe was on the stage in the middle of the show. He stops the band in the middle of a song and says, wait a minute, I'm sorry, but I got to get these boys right, okay? He had, you know, the young musicians, I don't know if the yellow band or the red band. Yeah. When I count off a specific tempo, you all have to play the tempo that I count off, right? And I'm going, yeah. That's old school, you know? Because, you know, the people ask me, what's the difference, you know, between musicians? I said, the young musicians, they grow up with too much love, man. You know, a lot of them grow up in the church, man. You sound beautiful, brother. You know what I mean? That's not how I grew up, man. I grew up with, if you lose the beat one more time, I'm going to cut you, right? Right? Like Richard T. I think I told you the story before. Richard T. was a great piano player, played with Aretha Franklin. I played too many notes in one song when we were recording with Grover Washington Jr. He put a knife up to me right here and said, you don't play anything extra unless I look at you first. And go like that. I was 19 years old, man. I was like, and then somebody told me when he does that, that means he really likes you, right?
It's a nice affectionate way.
But Joe Sample was the same way. He was hard on musicians, and but I think for the most part, it made you a better musician. You know what I mean?
By the way, the one thing you left out in the 10 years, well, it's been 10 years now, so in the 7 years up until Joe had got on the ship, it was the first time that a musician had stopped the show and dropped an F-bomb on stage. Because he did, and for those of you that were there, am I right?
He dropped an F-bomb.
It wasn't as nice as you said. Well, you
know, it was the iced tea that he was drinking.
From Long Island, right?
From Long Island. But he's a tremendous musician, man, and the Crusaders were truly a groundbreaking group, you know. And then his solo records, man, he has a record called Carmel that's just beautiful, Rainbow Seeker. He was such a tough guy, but he's such a romantic guy at the same time, you know. And then, and I grew up listening to those records. My buddy and I would drive my '73 Monte Carlo, man, and just listen to Joe Sample records. And, you know, one day, man, Tommy LaPuma, who was a producer at Warner Brothers, said, I'm producing Joe Sample. This is like '87. And he said, write me something for Joe Sample, man. And I wrote this tune for Joe Sample. And to hear the guy that you've been like driving your Monte Carlo listening to hear him playing your song, man, it was just like very much a high point, you know. And, you know, I got to be a very good friend with Joe. He says, come meet me at my house in Mammoth. You know, he had a cabin in Mammoth, California. And I said, okay, what are we going to do? He said, we're going to ski. And I said, okay, you know, Joe's an old man, you know what I mean? Like, I guess I'll ski with Joe. Boy, that boy hit that mountain, and I did my best to keep up with him, man. And he had been drinking all night, you know? And then he jumped on those skis and whoosh, 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 and I was like, just a tremendous, tremendous, very unique, one-of-a-kind musician. He will be sorely missed.
Absolutely. Hey, stick around. You're watching Backstage Pass with Marcus Miller.
Hi, I'm Marcus Miller. Now, I was born and raised in New York City. Starting as a teenager, I was going from one studio to another studio as a session musician, working with and backing legendary names like Miles Davis, Eric Clapton, Luther Vandross, Roberta Flack, Aretha Franklin, Herbie Hancock, David Sanborn, and many more. As we all know, New York has a heritage and long-standing history of jazz,
with many colorful interpretations. Next March, I'm going to take you on a tour of the Big Apple and show you my version of where jazz is alive and kicking in the city that never sleeps. Visiting places like Birdland, Blue Note Jazz Club, B.B. King's Club, and Diamond Horseshoe, all while staying at one of the world's foremost grand hotels, the Waldorf Astoria. We'll also visit Harlem and the famous Apollo Theater and see shows by incredible talent such as the John Pizzarelli Quartet, Jane Monheit, the Christian McBride Quartet, the Emmett Cohen Trio, Joe Lovano, Etienne Charles, and of course, yours truly with my band, which is going to be comprised of Aaron Parks, Eric Harlan, Gretchen Parlato, and Gregoire Marais. With lunches, dinners, shows, transportation, and accommodations, a program of this caliber is not to be missed.
Welcome back to Backstage Pass. I'm here with Marcus Miller. I'm not sure where we were. I think we might have been in LA, and Michael Lazaroff and I had just had dinner with Alonzo at a restaurant, and we were talking about the restaurant, and you told a very funny story about a friend of yours that you wrote The Power of Love for, that was very close to you, but we were eating at a place in LA called Roscoe's Chicken. And tell the story about Luther and...
Okay, I'm going to tell you two stories if you have time.
Yeah,
okay?
we have time.
First, the name of the restaurant is Roscoe's Chicken in LA. Very, very famous soul food restaurant, famous for their chicken and waffles, right? Which is, if you say chicken and waffles, you instantly hear soul music in your head. You know what I mean? Anyway, my first story is not Luther. My first story is Wayman Tisdale, right?
Yeah.
Wayman calls me up and he says, Marcus, Regina and I are going to get married, right? And we're going to spend part of our honeymoon in Los Angeles. Can you recommend some restaurants, nice restaurants, because this is going to be our honeymoon? I said, absolutely. So I gave him Roscoe's. I said, that's just, for breakfast, get some chicken and waffles, And then I gave him a place on PCH Pacific Coast Highway, really nice, swanky places. I gave him about 4 places. Anyway, after his honeymoon's over, I called Wayman and said, how'd it go? He said, man, we had the greatest time. And I said, nice, man. Did you go to Roscoe's? He said, oh, man, it was incredible, man. We had the chicken and waffle special, man. It blew our minds. I said, okay, how about Michael's? Did you go to Michael's on PCH? He goes, dude, we went to Roscoe's every day. I said, you went to Roscoe's every day on your honeymoon? You ate chicken and waffles? He said, yeah, we was happy as we could be. So that's my Wayman story. Luther Vandross is the one who introduced me to Roscoe's. And he was so famous that eating in Roscoe's would be impossible for him. You know what I mean? He would never get to the next bite because everyone would be asking for autographs and stuff. So he would send me in, right, with an order, right? And he'd wait outside in his car around the corner. So I would go in and I'd say, can I have half a chicken smothered? And, because it was very specific, what he was asking for. Anyway, I'd order the food and then I'd bring it right around the corner and we'd sit in his car and eat Roscoe's listening to Aretha Franklin records, man. One of my best memories ever, man.
What was it like working with him?
It was amazing, man. Luther and I met, we were both studio musicians in New York. And like I was saying, as a studio musician in New York, you're just running up and down Broadway making different dates. Luther was doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And lots of times they would add the background vocals to records after the rhythm section had played the music. They would overdub it, right? So lots of times we would be leaving and I'd see Luther coming in. And, I was a little smart ass. Don't mess up this track. We play good. Don't mess it up, And he'd just roll his eyes at me. So we got in the Roberta Flack's band together. She was doing gigs on the weekends, so we could do our sessions during the week, and we could play with Roberta on the weekends. And we became close then, man. I was a music snob, so I didn't really, listen to singers too much. So he took care of that. He gave me some schooling on great singers, man, and I owe him a lot. Anyway, we did a big demo for Luther at some point, and it became huge, million seller, never too much. And we continued from there. And it was just because we had started together, man, we had a really cool way of working. We didn't have to talk a lot.
Was he a one-take wonder? Or was
he was a one-take wonder. In other words, all the records that you remember Luther for, these days the band plays the song, and the producer says, okay, everyone go home, and then the singer comes in, and the singer sings the song maybe 7 or 8 times, and then the producer takes line from take 1 and second line from take 2, and they make a composite of all the best lines, which is cool. It sounds perfect, right?
Right.
But sometimes it misses something because it doesn't have that feeling that happens when you do it like Luther did it, which was, I'm sitting there, the drummer's there, the guitar player's there, and Luther's right there. And we're all doing it together. So if you hear a song, Superstar, right, which is, beautiful song that Luther recorded, and he starts going, keep it right there, keep it right there. He's talking to me and the drummer, right? Right? Everybody thinks he's talking to whatever girl he was singing to. He was telling the bass player and the drummer, don't put no jazz in here right now. I want that soulful, simple R&B groove. Keep it right there, keep it, don't change it, don't mess my song up. That's what he's saying. But that was, he didn't intend for that to stay on the record. He was just, giving us instruction, and then he figured we would turn that off when we mixed the record. But it sounded so cool, he ended up leaving it on there, and that's one of the nicest parts of the record. So that's what you get when when everybody's interacting together.
Well, man, I want to thank you because it's been to get the insight into stories about people like Joe Sample, Luther Vandross, Wayman Tisdale, and of course, your background and history with all the people you've worked with. It's an honor to hear those firsthand and to tell people, and to watch you on stage and to watch you direct a show with the simple look of an eye or just the move of your bass, and you orchestrate things so incredibly well. And it's an honor to have you here, and on behalf of everybody, thank you so much. And we look forward to the new album coming out in March. Backstage Pass with Marcus Miller. Thanks, man.